My name is Milo Marquez, and I'm a fifth generation Denverite. I grew up in East Denver. My grandmother's family grew up here on in the west side here, in this neighborhood before it was a campus. And I actually work with CLADO, the Colorado Latino Leadership Advocacy and Research Organization, as a director for the Latino Action Council. I'm also sit on the board with the Aurarian Historical Advocacy Council, and we work on the history of gentrification in this community. What I wanted to talk about today was the gentrification that occurred here on this campus, but also the gentrification that we continue to see throughout the city, throughout the North Denver, in East Denver, and what we're seeing in Southwest Denver. So first, I'm going to start by just kind of giving a little bit of background on gentrification. In 1964, British sociologist Ruth Glass coined the term to describe the influx of middle class displacing the people in London. But in 1830s, if we look back to 1830s in LA, Julian Chavez was born in New Mexico and then moved to Los Angeles in the 1840s and purchased a huge parcel of land called Chavez Ravine. Chavez Ravine later became blighted. The city labeled it as blighted. And in 1958, the community was displaced to build Dodger Stadium. In Denver, we saw what happened here in Auraria. The neighborhood was blighted and the folks were displaced. And now we have this nice campus, but we have a community that has been displaced and dispersed. Today, what we're seeing throughout Denver looks very different, but it is displacement. So I really wanted to have a discussion on what we're seeing throughout the city of Denver. I know the communities that I grew up in are being changed, and I'm seeing folks being displaced every day. I've been telling a story about a friend of mine who I grew up with in East Denver, who was recently displaced. He grew up there. He's an African American. Grew up with him since we were children. He lost his home in 2008 during the Great Recession, and it was now recently renting a house on 33rd and Race. He was told about 4 weeks ago that he had 2 weeks to move out of his home. His children attend the schools there. They play at the rec centers. They play at the parks. His parents live a block away. And so now he's looking for a new place to live, and he found a new rental, but it's way out in far Aurora. So what happens when the family is displaced? What are the effects that it has on the community when the parents, grandparents are there, aunts and uncles are there to care for the children, but now these families are displaced? What happens to them? And so I'd love to kind of open this up and actually have everyone talking about displacement, the effects, what they're seeing, and what happens when you lose your culture, your history, your identity because of displacement and gentrification. And what can we do as a community to work together to elect officials who are actually concerned about this issue? I talked to a lot of elected officials today in the job that I'm in, and they talk about the need for development, the need for improvement of the city, because some of these neighborhoods are blighted. The Glowville, Elyria, Swansea, GES, they identified it as a blighted community. So what happens when a community is blighted? What happens when their home values are low? Who comes in to buy those houses and then starts to develop those neighborhoods? So I'd love to just kind of open it up and have this discussion on the effects of gentrification. We know it happened here, but we cannot forget that it continues to happen every day throughout the city, and our neighborhoods are changing. Our cultures are being taken away from us. We're losing our language. So does anyone want to kind of open up and have some discussion on this? I know Brandon and I talk about this all the time. Is there anybody that would like to share a story or share some experience that they have with gentrification in their neighborhoods? Right.
So it's not new that the city of Denver is trying to destroy Gloveville. They've been doing that since the 1950s. First iteration of the highway, trying to turn it into an industrial district, no more residential, trying to bring in really noxious kinds of businesses. And they're still doing it, except they've Elyria now, Swansea now. So this is not new. I will say one thing. We do have a few really good city council people. Amanda Sandoval from the Northwest side is great. And there's some others. One other word of caution real quick. The governor has announced if he's reelected, he's intending to push more density as sustainability in the urban core. So so that's something to keep an eye out for.
Thank you, Rebecca Hunt. Anybody else?
Hi, my name's Cheyenne Mater. I'm just a student here at UC Denver. I'm going for music production, so you could call me a musician, producer. That's what I want to be. But I grew up right outside of Inglewood, or right outside of Denver in Inglewood, and I've seen a lot of I've just seen a lot of that whole area, and I've seen a lot of different parts of Denver really change a lot. And you talked about what does this do for, losing your culture and everything. I'm a descendant of Cherokee Native, my grandmother, and she was put randomly in New Mexico onto a Navajo reservoir. And then my grandfather, who's from Spain, married, and they moved and just had to acclimate in Littleton, Colorado to this lifestyle of they knew, they even speak their primary language was Spanish, and they taught my mother and my uncles to not speak it ever, and they taught them to really acclimate to acting white or so and kind of fitting in. They were always really scared. So now now here I am. I'm 20 years old. I'm going to school. I have no record of even my grandmother's birthday except it written down in a Bible. My parents have taught me very, very little about my culture, and I feel very disconnected, and I came here today to feel more connected, to be honest. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shireen. I am a student in MSU Denver Anthropology, and I am very glad I am here so I can say what I'm feeling in this place. Actually, when I listened to the panelists, they were talking about their stories. I had the same feeling, but at the bigger picture, I am from the first civilization, which is Kurdish from Mesopotamia, and I live here in the New Year civilization, which is USA. So I've been through a lot. My native language is Kurdish. And when I went to school, I had to learn Arabic. So when I moved here because of the war with Saddam Hussein and Kuwait, I don't know, 1991, you may guys know what I'm talking about. And I have to start over here. I build a family and start learning language, picking up culture. Still, I am struggling with some words from some acts and culture. So I have a feeling I am very not in a community because we are not thinking at the bigger picture that we all are human. We all humans are the same family. If we think that way, if we, every ethnic groups, they fulfill, they keep their language, their culture, and we will be like a colorful garden. So we need to pass this to like next generation, to people around us. We are good to, or nice and beautiful together with a deep deep practicing each our language and culture. But I think the system does not like this. That's why we are assimilated, and we still struggling. And right now, at this moment, I don't know, most of you in Iran know about the news, how the Kurdish lady, they did not let her name to be the same name that's their family wants. Her name was Gina at home, but the system, like Iranian system, they put her name as Mahsa, as a Persian name. So she been killed last week because little of her bang was out of her scarf. So people are around world are protesting for her with saying Jinjian Azadi, which is woman life freedom. I am personally thinking if women to be liberated or to be free thinker, so she can change the society. So this is what I try to share with you guys. Hopefully you're interested in my story.
Thank you so much. So what Aurarian Historical Advocacy Council does, as I mentioned, is we talk about the history of the displaced Aurarians, and we're talking about what is happening in the communities across Denver. Is anyone experiencing gentrification, or do they see it in Denver? And do they want to share what they're seeing and what positive or negative effects they're seeing?
Thanks, Milo. My name is Brandon Turner. I'm a graduate student at CU Denver studying medical anthropology. I wanted to bring up kind of an answer to Milo's question, because I know not everyone here identifies as someone who's been displaced or someone who has had to migrate to a new place. So for the perspective that you all might have, I'd like to bring the question of what do we do when we see people who are being displaced to areas that we live in. People, you know, I live in Cap Hill, and are we going to get a flood of people from Globeville coming in? You know, how do we make it so that these communities, these cultures are still intact? What is our role in doing it? Instead of just coming to symposiums, which is great. This is all very lovely. But I mean, what does it tangibly look like for us to support these communities that are being displaced? Do you guys understand my question? Yeah. As an anthropology student, we think a lot about emic and edic and the insider's perspective. And I know not everyone here has the insider's perspective of being displaced, having to move. So from that other perspective, you know, how do we support these communities? I've got ideas, you know, it's because when people have to leave, they have to go somewhere. And instead of looking at it from the perspective of the people who have to leave, how about the people who are there who have to invite these folks in?
Thank you, Brandon. What can we do as a community? What are some of the solutions that we can come up with to help preserve some of these communities?
Good afternoon. My name is Jay Alida. I was a professor here on the community college for 28 years, and also a history major. But there's a couple of things that come to mind when I think about some of the solutions. One of them is we can we can have our state representatives in terms of property tax. When we bought our house for $12,000 in 1970, and now it's worth $750,000, you know, we were not expecting that we'd have to pay, you know, $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 a year. And so what happens is it puts pressure on the people in those communities to do something. Do we not pay taxes? And then it goes into the bank and gets foreclosed on, and then the people that are lurking to buy those properties jump on it. You know, I think that's one of the issues that we can deal with, you know, that has an immediate impact is what was the original value of the house and what is a reasonable expectation for the community. You know, a house in Gloveville that, again, like I said, $7,000, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and now it's worth $450,000. The people can't pay that property tax. So maybe we leave it up to the state legislature to come to some agreement. And maybe the new owners, the people that come in and buy those houses, they're subjected to the new property tax, but that older homeowners get grandfathered in. And the reason I mentioned this is because back in 1970s, History Colorado produced a book about historic Curtis Park. On the cover of that book was my grandma's house, beautiful Victorian house. She passed away and left it to her children and grandchildren, and as a result, it became run down. That whole neighborhood became a historic district. So when we were able to get control of the house and trying to redevelop it, we ran into a lot of roadblocks because of historic Colorado, because there's certain types of materials you need to buy and use. And so that's preventing it from getting fixed up. So my cousin now has control of that house, and hopefully it's going along soon. But again, there's the predators in the community that watch from the corners, and every time somebody's over there, they're ready to come over there and want to condemn it so that they can come in and buy it for a swan song. So that property, if it gets fixed up, is worth over $1 million. And some of the people in those communities know that. So again, I would like to see both the historic district and History Colorado make it a little bit easier for some of the older homeowners to come in there and refurbish their house, you know, sort of back off a little bit on whether or not you need to go out and purchase a wrought iron fence that costs $300 a square foot or whatever it is, and, you know, allow them to fix it up the way they would like within some guidelines, of course. But those are two suggestions that I have. Thank you.
So I want to give you guys a little bit of data, how cities are funded. 40 years ago, the wealthy, the top 5%, were taxed at a rate of about 75 to 78%. Today, that rate is between 32 and 40%. There are so many different tax loopholes, gain deferments. Taxes, what do they fund? They fund our schools, they fund our parks, our recs, recreation centers, our public transit, our roads, and subsidized housing. Today, these cities are cash strapped, so they generate taxes by increasing housing in those communities, building these apartment buildings because they need more tax revenue. So really what we're trying to do is figure out what are the solutions? What can we do to create these communities and keep these marginalized communities intact? Some of the solutions that I've heard from different folks in the community are inclusionary zoning, creating more affordable housing. Right now, we see a lot of these buildings that are popping up and they'll have 5% designated to affordable housing or 20%. But that's it. We need more of that. We need more of that. Universal rent control. If you go to California, you go to big cities like New York, they have universal rent control. We don't have that. Land price control and controlling the land prices and controlling the development. What happened to our affordable what happened to our public housing? We don't have public housing anymore. We have this affordable housing, which is really not that affordable for a lot of us. So how can we find solutions to create that? Who are we going to elect that can help us find that? And I'm opening up the mic again for anyone to chat about anything that we've been talking about. Anyone? Virginia? Anything you want to say about this? Not right now. Anybody else? Gene?
I was just wondering, the idea that Jay brought up, is that being worked on at all, or is this merely an idea at this point?
No. You know, and the other part that comes to mind too is that, you know, people on fixed incomes that live in those neighborhoods can't continue to increasingly raise, come up with the taxes when the tax base gets raised every year. You know, I owned a house in North Denver that was paid off, and our taxes were $2,000 a year. And after 10 years, they kept going up to, I think when we finally moved, it was about 4,500, you know, but because we had some savings, we were able to keep up with it and then set some money aside over the years. But people on fixed incomes, it becomes increasingly difficult. But as Milo mentioned, you know, the cities, they don't, their tax base, the other option is for them to have police on every corner giving you a ticket, you know, speeding. Everybody has those air fresheners on their windows. That's illegal, but it's only legal when they stop you, because then it becomes an excuse for those who drive while being Mexican, drive while being black, drive while being other, you know, to get stopped and then ticketed. But, you know, middle-class mom with 14 kids in the car, she's okay. You know, it's just air freshener. But you have a little picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe hanging down, and hey, that's illegal. That's a $50 fine. That's the other way the tax base is increased, you know, through fines and traffic. But as far as I know, no, you might ask Norbert that question, because as a former representative, you know, that may be something that he may be privy to. So.
Thank you. Any other comments, Virginia?
If any of you are really interested in seeing what this actually looks like, go to Sun Valley, and it's in your neighborhood right here. And their school will not be open because the children are gone, and there's no community there. And there is a plan that's called the Decatur Plan it was approved a few years ago by City Council, that Sun Valley would look like 5 Points and up around 19th Avenue. The pictures that are in this plan, that's exactly what it looks like. And the Auraria campus is a part of it. So Auraria campus was, in the early days, as you heard, many promises were made, and the education was part of it. And now the Auraria campus is in partnership with the Broncos. I'm not sure, the city, of course, and in order to gentrify Sun Valley. And it's not going to stop there, because in the Decatur plan, there's a plan for the movement to keep going across Federal to that other neighborhood west of Federal. And the overall plan for this city is to gentrify it all. And if you look at the map of Colorado and you see where Denver is, how big is it in that map? You can barely see it. And so it's going to be wall to wall gentrified. And as Milo is saying now, it's happening as we're sitting here. Landlords are listening to the developers. They're getting offered lots of money, and they're going for it. So the people that live in those buildings are right now having to do what the people that were moved out of Auraria, they're going through it right now. And in Westwood, they are trying to save their community, but there's too many renters. But they are trying, and if you take a drive through Morrison Road in that little neighborhood out there, you will see that they're trying to put murals on the walls and plants and flowers out on the sidewalk, and just making it feel like home, and you want to stay there and don't take, you know, the tons of money. If you happen to own your house, stay there. And I think another thing that people don't think about is, okay, so you're going to pay me $300,000 for my house. Don't think about where am I going to go that I'm going to find a house that I can afford. So it's a vicious cycle. And I think we really need to give some serious thought about it. And we need to focus starting right in our own little tiny spot called Denver in the middle of the Colorado map. I mean, if we can't do something here, you know, the people are going somewhere. And one of the things that the displaced Aurarians had to go through was just being ignored. It's like they disappeared into thin air. And you know, just recently, you know, since we've been talking about it, people are saying, well, where did those people go? And that's a good question. Where did they go? Everybody went somewhere. So this is where we are now. And if any of you are interested in this whole topic, give it some thought. Do some research. Talk to the people that are being affected. And do something if you can.
Thank you. The author Peter Moskowitz, in his book, How to Kill a City, said gentrification is never an accident. It is always on purpose. When we look at, Virginia was talking about what we say the east side, that's the 5 points and what they're calling the Rhino now. If you walk through those neighborhoods, you can see when they decided to buy the property to develop the new World Trade Center over off of Walnut Street. Was that on accident or was that on purpose? We could see this in other cities as well. In New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina, there was gentrification then as well. The governor of Louisiana said, this is a storm of a lifetime. It's an opportunity of a lifetime. And what he meant by that was they were going to gentrify that neighborhood from one side to the other. So this is what's happening in the city. We could see it happening. What I've been asking the professors that are part of this symposium and the ones that are going to be part of the MSU discussion at the Richard and Virginia Castro event next month is, are we going to, in 30 years from now, are we going to be asking the same question? Why did we allow this to happen in this neighborhood? Just like we're doing 50 years later here in Auraria. Why do we continue to allow it to happen? We know it wasn't good what happened to the displaced Aurarians, but we're allowing it to happen right now in West Denver, in the Highlands, in the 5 Points, in the Rhino District. I'm going to open it up to anybody else that wants to chime in.
Right now, the city of Denver is going through a process where they're getting together citizen committees in related neighborhoods. And I happen to be on the steering committee for the near northwest side, which is Jefferson Park, Highland, Sunnyside, and Chaffee Park, which is the least developed of our four neighborhoods. And we're working for 2.5 years with the city, with our communities, with heavy, heavy, heavy community input to find ways of making it more affordable, more equitable, preserve the initial character of the neighborhood, not tear down all the old buildings. We're working to say, okay, how do we make this better for walkers and bikers? How do we have a public face on things? How do we support small business? How do we, I mean, it's all across the board. So in answer to what can we do, you can get involved when this process comes to your neighborhood. You can be one of the voices. You can be one of the idea people for your neighborhood. And this is something they're looking at for the next 40 years. Okay, does this neighborhood have a rec center? Does it have a library? Does it have medical? Does it have grocery stores? How do we do all that? And so there is a process right now where we can help make that happen.
Any other comments?
Hi, I'm Betsy Metzger. I work in faculty affairs at CU Denver. And I strongly believe in the importance of voting. So we all know that the state and federal elections coming up in November. You will start getting your ballots in the mail the week of October 17th. If you are not registered, you can register on election day, up all the way through election day, because we have such a wonderful system here in Colorado. The other thing is there are city elections in April, and there will be a new mayor elected because our current mayor is term limited. There will be several new city council members who are also term limited. New people will be in those roles. People are declaring their candidacies now, so it's a good time to reach people. They'll be listening because they want your vote. So vote.
That is a great point, Betsy. Voting is, we should all be focused on electing the officials that are going to actually work on this issue. I was at a community event last week and I was wearing a shirt that represented GES, Globeville Area Swansea. And I asked a city council candidate who is running for that same district, what that meant, what my shirt meant to him. And he didn't have an answer. And that was a concern to me, because if that person didn't understand the trauma and the food apartheid, food desert in those communities, and didn't understand that, I think it's going to be tough for him to learn about it. And I think that when these folks are running, we should be asking them these questions. What are you going to do about affordable housing? What are you going to do about gentrification, disbursement, and displacement of our communities? And if they give you an answer, then, and when they get elected and they're serving, and if they fail you, then you take that back to them and you hold them accountable at the next election. It's so important to vote, and it's so important to hold these politicians accountable for what they're doing, because as I keep saying it, we don't want East Denver to be the same and have a symposium for East Denver in 30 years. We need to solve it now. We need to solve these issues now. Any other comments?
Hi, everybody. My name is Renee Moreno. I'm a professor at California State University, Northridge, and in Chicano and Chicana Studies staff. So just a little bit of background. We have the oldest and largest Chicana and Chicana Studies department in the nation and in the world. But I also grew up here. So I grew up in Swansea. I came to school here at CU Denver got my master's degree and my undergraduate degree, and then went away to the University of Michigan for my PhD. But I also, you know, as somebody, I've been doing my research around what's happening in Swansea, Elyria, and Global. And at the end of the day, this is violence. It's, you know, like displacing people, which, you know, I think some of the people on the panel this morning were talking about, is a violent act. It removes people. I think what's happening in Elyria, Swansea, and Glowville, and what's happened here before, what's happening across the city of Denver, is something called settler colonialism. And what settler colonialism does is its desire is to erase people. That's what it does. So there's this really interesting woman by the name of Roxanne Bardun, who's written about settler colonialism and its effect in Chicano and Latino, Chicana Latino communities. So I would encourage people also to look her up. And then another person who writes about this is the African-American historian, Robin D.G. Kelly, who was my mentor when I was at the University of Michigan. So, you know, it's important to, you know, I think even as like our brothers and sisters from the indigenous communities we're talking about this morning, it's also important to educate yourself. You know, like Robin's comments has always been love, study, and struggle. You know, that's what we do, and that's what's important for us to do when we fight back against these sorts of things. It's like, you know, to remember that there's a theory going on, right? And that we can, as people, as actors in the communities that are being affected by this stuff, to act and to act smartly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Virginia and I have been calling it urban colonization. That's what we've been calling this because it's the same thing that we saw throughout history. Any other last comments before we take some time before the next presentation?
Kind of just going off what I just heard. I just want to say, like, I think a big part of it is that they want to like kind of take these people's voices away that are getting displaced and, you know, shut them up. And I think really remembering that we have to keep our voices heard, and we have to make sure that we are being heard by our representatives or whoever we need to be heard by to get change to occur. We need to make sure that we aren't letting them quiet us, basically, is all I want to say.
Thank you. We can't be complacent. We need to have these conversations. I know that I'm so excited that UCD decided on this symposium, and I'm so excited that MSU this year is going to be talking about it. But we need to continue these conversations. I have all the time. People probably get tired of hearing me because I'm always like, oh my God, gentrification, it's crazy what's going on in our communities. But we need to continue these conversations, and we need to work with our neighbors and work with our community to figure out what can we do to save our histories, our culture, and preserve them. So I want to thank everyone for just taking a few minutes to talk about this, and hope that all of you continue these conversations. Yeah.
Like, what's the next step after this? Has CU Denver ever apologized for what they've done to the community, or? Yeah.
So she's asking if CU has apologized, and they have, and they've give the scholarships that are designated for the displaced Aurarians is some form of reparations. MSU and CCD are doing the same. But then we need to ask ourselves, what's going to happen to the rest of the communities that are going to be displaced? And I don't have a solution. I'm not here to tell you, oh, I have all the answers. We all need to work together collectively to find those solutions and find out how we can save our communities. In the next 10 years, at the rate that we're going, within 10 years, there'll be no more neighborhoods of color in the city of Denver. They will be living in the outskirts, in Aurora, in Thornton, in Northglenn, and coming in to the city to provide services for those that can afford to live here in the city. And what does that look like? People say, well, you know what? Gentrification is cyclical. It happens. It always happens. But what happens when you are working 2 jobs and you're living in Greeley because you can no longer afford to live in Denver, and you're providing those services? Who's taking care of your children while you're living in Greeley? What are those children doing while you're at work every day and their responsibility is to walk from school to home, and they're taking care of themselves? Who's caring for those children? And are we setting up those children for failure by not having their parents in those homes? We need to ask ourselves these questions and talk about this, and talk about it as often as you can, like I do, because to me, there's nothing more important than this that's happening in our city, because it's going to affect the education. It affects everything around us. So I want to thank you again for having this conversation. And I look forward to any of you reaching out, talking to Virginia and I, and those other folks that were on the panel that are part of Aurarian Historical Advocacy Council, because we're not only talking about what happened to the displaced people here, but we're talking about what's happening to marginalized communities of color throughout the city and the state. Thank you.
And I just want to say our next panel at 2:00 is going to be addressing displacement and gentrification in other areas of Denver. So this was a great lead-in. Thank you, Milo.